Ladies and gentlemen, it was only last week that we attempted to build the most beautiful gaming PC build we could in 2024, but things move fast around here, and today MSI actually reached out to sponsor a video to create the most gorgeous gaming PC build in 2024, and I think we're onto a real winner here, because we've got MSI's Project Zero in combination with their most attractive gaming PC case. This is the Pano 700L, and this is all one piece of curved tempered glass, and I think this whole thing's going to look stunning. Throughout this video then, we're going to be creating an awesome RTX 4070 gaming PC, and we're going to be showing you all of the components that go into this, the full build process, and of course the full gameplay benchmarks, so you can see exactly how well this thing performs. I'm incredibly excited, despite the fact that my voice, as you can tell, is completely gone. So let's get our build started, shall we? I suppose I probably should start this off by saying, if you are new to the channel, obviously that is a little bit tongue-in-cheek. The difference between most beautiful and gorgeous is all down to personal preferences and things, but the fact remains that this is an absolutely stunning looking chassis. I mean, granted, I'll get this out of the way now, this is not particularly cheap, so if you wanted to go for something that is still beautiful but costs quite a lot less money, obviously those cases are available, and they do also support MSI Project Zero. But this is kind of like their flagship thing that they've got at the moment, and as we alluded to in the intro, the most unique thing about this really is that you do have this one piece of tempered glass that's been curved, and then that actually removes as one single panel. And I will say as well that whilst there is a slight bit of distortion in the curve, this is actually better than some of the other cases that I've seen, that this distortion actually takes up quite a lot more of the glass, and then in a way that kind of defeats the point of going for like curved glass, because you could just have like two panels and it'll be perfect. But once the glass comes off, you then be greeted to what is a very open chassis, and hopefully one that's going to be very easy to work in. I mean, I will say as well that there was a little bit of a mix-up, and MSI have sent me a used case, which, don't get me wrong,
I'm not a diva.
that would be fine. I mean, maybe I am. But anyway, that would normally be fine, apart from the fact that a load of accessories and things were missing, which was a little bit of a shame. So obviously you will get all of the PCI bits in the box, but they've actually pre-fitted this PCIe riser cable and the back plate to get that to work. So this has, in a way, saved me a job, because they've pre-fitted a load of fans and things as well that also don't come with the case. These are MSI's F120s. They come in a 2-pack or a 3-pack, and then obviously you'll be at the same stage we are. But I'm afraid I'm not so impressed with their cable management skills, because when we take this back piece off, which is completely toolless, and this is all really nice thick bit of metal, I mean, I couldn't really bend that if I try actually, which is pretty nice. Can't say that about your normal side panel. I don't know what on earth they've done here, look. They've like cable managed it in the way I used to back in the late 2000s. I mean, that is not great, but I can fix it because I'm PC centric. And I must admit actually that the more I use this, the more I touch it and feel it, the more actually that is growing on me, because yes, this is very expensive, but the build quality, as I say, it's not really like anything else I've used before. I mean, how many cases could you actually pick up by like the back PSU bracket? Basically none, and this thing is not lightweight either. So as I say, cheaper cases are definitely available. Don't like everyone go out and think you must have this above literally anything else. But if you are in the market for more of a showpiece chassis, but you don't want something that's like gigantic, I can definitely see the appeal of this. But that's enough guessing about the case itself. Let's press on with the rest of the build. And as you can tell, we're going for Intel this time, and we are going for Project Zero. I love Project Zero. It's a shame actually that my personal rig isn't Project Zero. I would have loved it to have gone down that route. Maybe we can make some adjustments later, but essentially this aims to tidy up your build and make it easier to build as well by putting all of the connections on the back of the motherboard, and thus on the back of the chassis. And especially when you pair it with something like this, it means you can get a way cleaner PC build that's not only easier to manage, but as I say, one that just looks way better too. So this is not the cheapest motherboard in the world, but it's not actually the most expensive either. This is Z790, so you can of course do some overclocking. And as you can see, it looks really clean and tidy, because again, all of those connections are actually on the back. And I quite like this silver effect, because it means it will go in either a white case or a black case and still look pretty good. But there's your backside, a lot of connections as you can see, but essentially everything's in the same place it normally would be, just literally on the back. So you can see obviously your ATX power, USB-C, USB 3, front panel, where's that? Over here, I'm getting confused by the left and right, but yes, down here, and then obviously like HD audio. So very easy to work with. Just do make sure that obviously you're putting this down on a maybe softer surface like the motherboard box if you can, because you've now got extra pins to protect. So let's do just that, shall we? And drop this down into position. And then I will say that the rest of the build, I actually want to be a little bit more modest, which I know might sound a little bit confusing, bear in mind we're using such an expensive case, but I wanted this to work with pretty much any chassis, right? Or anyone that works with Project Zero. I didn't want to tie us capacitor, like has to be RTX 4080, 4090. So we're actually going for an i5 to bring the cost down a little bit. And as we know, the gaming performance of this isn't actually going to be that shy off of an i7 or an i9. Very simple to get this installed. Obviously just open up our slot, grab our CPU, and then being ultra careful not to damage any pins, drop this down into position, give it a slight wiggle till it kind of like catches, but don't put any force on the pins themselves. And then you give this a push. And then the Olympics ensues, a little bit early, still got a month to go for that. And then we're ready to move on to the next step, which is either your SSD or your RAM. And just for a change today, let's go with the SSD. And this is actually one of my favorites on the market actually. This is the NM790 from Lexar. And this kind of gives you the performance of the big boys, but then the cost associated with some of the more new players in the game, which is nice. But installing this is as straightforward as just removing 2 screws, removing the cover, and then the protective film that's on the back. You literally just press this into position, and then you use this little like quick catch thing just to hold that into position, and then pop this back on top and screw it down. I'd also like to throw into the mix, by the way, that if you are a regular viewer of PC Centric, you've probably been wondering how PC Centric aims to mix things up, to keep things fresh. And one of my shower thoughts that I had last week was, would it be funny if I did a whole video in an RP accent, or at least my best attempt? And I came to the conclusion that it was, and then I started doing it in this video, and it was not. So what I'm gonna do is we'll introduce the RAM in RP, and if you like this, let me know in the comments below, and I'll try and do a whole video like this, but I don't think it's gonna work. But I would like to say, by the way, that you might be wondering what an RP accent is. Essentially, it's what Americans view like your classic or quintessential English to sound like, right? So it's essentially like a posher version of, ooh.
I didn't say I was any good at it.
It's essentially like a posher version of English, right? And it annoys me a little bit because quite a few people actually say to me, oh, you've got quite a posh English accent.
I'm like, really? Have you heard me before?
Whereas obviously this is a lot posher than that. So I was wondering as a bit of a challenge whether I could do a whole video like this, but I'm not sure it would work. Anyway, pressing swiftly on, this is the memory that we're using. This is DDR5. Please do not use DDR4 with this motherboard. It would not work. So you can't bring this across from an older build. If you're going for DDR4, you need 5. And the reason that I've actually opted for this RAM should be quite obvious. It's because it really blends in. Oh God, it's awful, isn't it? It really blends in actually with the color scheme that we're going for. This is only a 5600 megahertz kit, but of course you could buy a faster one, which is what I'd recommend. Just do be sure to enable XMP in your motherboard BIOS, otherwise it will not be running at the full rated speed, or it will run at 4800 megahertz. I've lost this, haven't I? This wasn't funny to start with, and the fact that I can't do it makes it even less funny, so sad times. It appears my American accent is better than the rest. Hey y'all, I've just put my RAM in my system. See, it's great. Maybe it's just because I've got a cold. Normally my accents are way better than that, 100%. Anyway, the good news is we're pretty much ready to rock and roll now and put this in our chassis. But because we're going for an all-in-one liquid cooler, I would actually advise that you at least take this out of the box and have a look at how it mounts to your board before actually getting this installed, because it's a lot easier to do this now, especially with Intel, because they have a little bracket to put on. So here we have our cooler. This is the E360. We will of course have to mount these fans onto the radiator. But this is actually a relatively inexpensive cooler actually for its size, which is pretty good. It's pretty effective too. RGB is nice, and it's going to daisy chain with the rest of the fans that we have. I've actually got a Ryzen bracket on that at the moment, so let's find the Intel stuff, which is in this bag. Installation should be pretty straightforward. Just grab your bracket and then kind of lay this down on top of the box, and then just find those holes with your motherboard. At least I say that, actually, because it's Project Zero, you've got all these connections, don't you, that kind of prop it up. So this is a little bit more difficult than normal. Let's see if we can just pop this on and then maybe put this at the top corner of the box. Then it's just a case of grabbing the Intel screws that are very clearly labeled. Then you can screw these into position. And then once you've done that, I now think you're actually ready to get this inside your chassis. And this should be fairly straightforward, but obviously I've got a riser pre-installed that you would not have at this stage. But we'll lay this down like any other case. Pick up our board. Ow, try not to spike yourself on the back of the ARGB pins though. And then obviously just line this up with the back. Just fit that down into position. And then of course, if you are using the riser, at this stage you can now actually slide this into the slot. And then once you've done that, you should actually be most of the way there really. I'd say all of the hard bits have been done. I mean, some people get a little bit confused with the power supply, but otherwise pretty much good to go. Again, remember though that these fans were pre-installed for me. I didn't put these in there, you won't have them if you buy the same chassis. So we've got a total of 7 actually pre-done for us, and there are these brackets as well, so if you do want to add fans, it's quite straightforward. You just lift this out, screw them in, and then put them back in. As for what fans I would go for, it depends what you're looking to do really. Like, unless you're going for like a 4090, I wouldn't say you need like really high-end fans, but obviously if you get ones that interconnect together, it's going to make your cable management way easier, so that's what I'd recommend. Let's stop moaning for a second and actually plug in our front panel connection, which is down at the bottom left of this side of the board. HD audio is at the bottom right. USB Type-C is this little silver one up here. Above that, we've got USB 3. And then comes what is almost certainly going to be the bane of my existence, which is this bundle of cables. Let's actually see what we got here. Well, I don't know how long that took, but I think actually, all things considered, I've done quite a good job. The problem is that you've got these 3-into-1 splitter converter things for the fan speed, and this gives you a huge amount of bulk here, but the RGB bulk I've managed to get down the side and down the bottom. Other than that, there's not really anything that's in the way, but there's not much else you could do with that besides putting it here, but there's going to be more power supply cables and things going in. So a few cable ties, I think actually it's fairly easy to do a decent job. The emphasis really is that if you'd gone for daisy chainable fans, you wouldn't be having this problem at all. So as I say, highly recommend you do that. But if you don't, you can at least stuff a lot of the cables and things down the bottom, but we're making a decent move anyway. But this PC building fun bus waits for no person, so instead I think it's time to actually press on with our cooler, and we're going to ignore the fact that I've dropped the fans on the floor. I do want to address something relatively important though, which is that what I would like to do is to have the tubes facing downwards on the radiator here. If I can, yes, there we go. So we put that in there. And then we'd actually install the CPU cooler like that. But as you can see, there's not actually enough tube length to do that. So the alternative is going to be either to put the radiator here, and then we can have the tubes facing downwards on the cooler, fantastic. But then obviously we've now got the tubes facing upwards on the radiator, which is, it should be okay, but it's not optimal, because if you do get air bubbles, then they may well collect here, and this can sort of go into your flow and affect like pump life and things like that. So what I would probably recommend is that if you're following along at home, probably put the radiator at the top here, in a more standard configuration. But as I've already got these fans and I've already cable managed them once, I'm not doing that again. So I'm going to do it like this, and we'll see if we can hear any gurgling and stuff like that and give you a bit of feedback. But yes, I would recommend that you put the radiator at the top in this case, if you can. So fans are in, and then it's yet more cables to deal with. Daisy chainable fans, please, ladies and gentlemen. We should now be able to drop this into place. Yes, there we are. Oh, actually, I say that, I need to take the bracket out. That would probably help first. Then we can place the whole thing back into position. It's actually quite easy because it's on like a peg system. But then, of course, the last piece of the puzzle is to actually get some thermal compound and put this on top of your CPU. If you don't want to lay your case down flat, this bit is definitely a little bit easier to do like that. If anything, that's actually slightly too much, but it's better to have too much than not enough. Then you can grab your pump head and just lay this across those screws. Then you can grab your nuts and secure this down in like a cross pattern. Then you can just route through all of the cables to the back. And then of course we will have more cables that we need to actually get plugged in, but it is only 3 fans and a pump, so it's not quite as bad as we had before. And I've actually left myself a little daisy chain connection spare here, so actually this bit should be okay. Oh, there we are. Done. Well, not done, we're still missing a few bits, but you can see cable management, look, done. I can't really get away from having this bulk at the top. You're welcome to try and make it better yourself, but I'm telling you, it ain't gonna happen. But all things considered, at least there is plenty of space and it is dual chamber, and for me, this is actually pretty good cable management. There's just not any way you can put this bulk. But besides that, anyway, the point really is that even with all of that, because of Project Zero, you still can't see any of it, because obviously you have this super clean chamber here, which is quite nice. But let's press on now and actually get our graphics card installed, which, as I always say, is my favorite bit of any build. And the reason we're going for a 4070 here today is because, as I say, I wanted the actual build itself, believe it or not, to be a bit more modest in terms of the CPU and GPU combination. So if you're doing something similar at home with these components, then you know you won't have to go for all of the bells and whistles. This is the performance that you can get. This one is also the Gaming X Trio as well, so it's going to look a lot nicer in our rig than some of the more like bog standard ones you can get. But the performance of this is still great. Obviously it is a 40 series card as well, so you get all of the features like DLSS, frame gen, like really good ray tracing. 4070 actually for most people still all you're going to need. It depends on the resolution. If you're playing at 1080p, this is overkill. If you're playing at 1440p or like maybe 4K 60, this is probably going to be a really nice balance. But obviously if if you want to play at like 4K, high refresh rate, RT on like everything, then obviously yes, step up to something like a 4070 Ti Super or 4080, 4090. Well, let's drop this down into our vertical GPU mount, as it's been pretty much all done for us. I'll come around this side actually, makes the whole thing a lot easier. There we are, all dropped into position, and everything actually is perfectly themed. I mean, this basically has been the MSI PC, so I guess we shouldn't be surprised, but that is a looker. And then I'll speed through this one. The last piece of the puzzle is the power supply. Surprise, surprise, it's by MSI, but actually value for money is very good with this, I believe. This is the A850GL. This is a PCI Gen 5 compatible PSU, and the way that they've done this is very clever actually, because one of the common problems with the older versions of the Gen 5 ATX3 standard was obviously that the cable could come loose, whereas MSI decided to put their big brain thinking caps on and made the inside of the connection bright yellow. And the thinking and the theory is that if you plug this in and you can still see any yellow, then it's not actually in all of the way, which is very simple but genius, and hopefully it's going to help a lot of people out. I'll also say as well that obviously this is fully modular, which is going to mean that you're going to have less cables floating about in your rig, easier to manage. But then also, because this is 850 watts, it's going to be very useful for an upgrade path if you want to go for something a little bit heavier duty, maybe like a future Nvidia graphics card or something like that, without having to upgrade your power supply, which is smart. I imagine that getting this installed is actually pretty straightforward. Obviously make sure the fan can breathe, so it's actually facing this way towards you through the mesh. But otherwise it should just slot into position like that. We then screw this down into position, get all of our cables plugged in, and then actually remember that most of the connections are on the back of the motherboard, of course, meaning we don't actually then need to go back into the main chamber and ruin the aesthetics of our build. I'd genuinely forgotten that, and that's a nice little bonus. So let's spin this round for just one final time, connect our PCIe to our graphics card, and then, ladies and gentlemen, I think that is our showpiece gaming PC rig complete. And I don't know about you, but I think this already looks incredible, even off, which actually surprisingly a lot of gaming PCs don't these days. I will show you the cable management, and this is definitely the most cables I think I've ever had to deal with in a single rig, and this is how I've dealt with it. I know I could neaten it slightly more with like these power cables and things. There's enough places to manage everything actually, so all in all, pretty good. But of course the big question is, will this actually work? We'll grab ourselves a keyboard, mouse, and of course the PC-centric mouse mat, available at pccentric.store. We get the power switch turned on, and we'll see if it works. Oh, there was a delay. There was a delay. And yes, we actually have RGB on all of the fans. I was unsure whether I plugged them in all properly, but there we are. Seems as if we've actually got two different light loops going on as well, which is to be expected, I suppose, depending on how it's tuned. But hopefully we'll be able to get everything to match and look full rainbow, including the graphics card as well, which is nice. But the big question is, are we actually going to get a signal? Oh, yes! Yes, we did! Oh, and so many people always say, oh, we build so many PCs, there's no way this excitement is genuine. When you've spent this long on this PC and you've had to do all that cable management, let me tell you, you really want it to work. And so, ladies and gentlemen, through the power of lunch, today was fish and chips, which I realise is very on brand actually for an English person. Even though I cheated, it was fish and hash browns, which is a bit weird. But anyway, not relevant to the video. We are now all set up and ready to go, and I've got this all configured actually with MSI's Mystic Light software to illustrate that everything can be synced together, which is really cool. And it does showcase actually just how much of a good case this is when it comes to actually showing off everything inside your rig. And obviously, if you are going to go down this route, I would highly recommend you do use Project Zero, because while it's not got rid of every single cable here, it's done a very good job indeed. I mean, it's pretty much just the tubes for the all-in-one that you can see, and then maybe a couple of cables like sticking out the top, but barely anything. I mean, the graphics card cable, where you've got this in the vertical orientation, you can barely see at all. So I'm really happy with this. Yes, it's expensive. No, it's not for everyone. But as we've seen in one of the previous builds, you can find this in the top right corner of your screen, MSI do offer Project Zero cases at much more affordable prices, which is when this whole 4070 i5 thing will actually make a whole bunch more sense. But if you are serious about this case, then it's expensive, but I don't think you can argue with the results. So that's everything from a visual point of view, but how about the gameplay itself? Well, let's begin with some Cyberpunk 2077. This is currently running at 4K with DLSS set to performance, ray tracing disabled, and we do have DLSS frame gen disabled as well. And we're currently getting around about 60 FPS actually, so if you are using like a FreeSync or a G-Sync monitor, then obviously this is going to be a really nice way to play. It's not the highest frame rate in the world. I mean, if you're talking about this purely from like a FPS point of view, then obviously getting near the 100 FPS mark is going to make it a little bit smoother. But for what is pretty much a very visual and story-driven experience, I think this is going to be a great way to play. If we do want to increase our frame rate though, we can actually turn on DLSS frame generation. And obviously the way this works is essentially to add an AI-generated frame in between rendered frames. So a misconception is that DLSS super resolution actually decreases the latency, whereas FrameGen will add an ever so slight latency penalty. So we've got this turned on now, and you can see that our frame rate has now increased. The game definitely looks a lot smoother. It's running around about 80 to 84 FPS, but the latency has now actually gone up to, what's that, around about 60 milliseconds or so. So with a slight latency penalty that we do get by actually recording this is probably how I would choose to play Cyberpunk at 4K. But realistically, the 4070 is probably more aimed at high-end 1440p gaming. So if we want to turn our ray tracing on, let's try this at 1440p. We change our DLSS super resolution to balanced, and then let's have a look what happens to our frame rate. Well, obviously the game is now less sharp because it's not rendering at such a high-end resolution, but as you can see, our frame rate has pretty much gone through the roof now. We're currently getting around about 140 to 150 FPS. That is not too shabby whatsoever. I mean, let's actually hop on a motorbike so we can cross the city a little bit so you're not looking at the same thing. You can see the frame rate has dropped ever so slightly now, but it's still around about 130 FPS. And as I say, that latency pretty much hasn't changed actually, around about 60 milliseconds or so. But if we do want to turn ray tracing on, let's have a look what happens. And I imagine this will affect the latency a little bit. I mean, yes, it has, but I think it definitely depends where you are in the game, because actually it doesn't seem to have drastically gone up. This is one of the benefits actually of obviously having an Nvidia GPU. It can handle ray tracing rather well, but still around about 68, maybe 65 milliseconds or so of latency. I would actually very strongly consider turning the frame gen off. And our frame rate, as expected, has of course now gone down to around about 70, 75 FPS. But our latency is now what I would describe as pretty much bang on the money, around about 50 to 55 milliseconds or so. As I say, we're recording, so take a couple off that as well. I'd say this is probably going to be the way I would choose to play at 1440, but obviously it depends on your preferences really. And if you're more about actually like the way it physically feels, obviously then you can sort of turn ray tracing off. But if you want the more complete experience, then yeah, the 4070 can handle ray tracing pretty well. But moving on to our next title, and no surprises here, this is of course Hogwarts Legacy. We've currently got this running at 4K, DLSS performance, ray tracing enabled, set to high, everything else is actually set to ultra. And as you can see, we're getting a pretty good frame rate actually, around about 60, 65 FPS or so. And bearing in mind this is a game you're probably going to want to play with a controller or something like that, I think it's holding up quite well. I mean, we are getting a little bit of stutter from here and now. I'm not sure whether this is because the ray tracing's enabled, it's not the best optimized game to be honest, or whether it's just because it's the first time we've opened it up on this particular PC. But assuming that the stuttering is only temporary and does stop, then I think you'd be very happy with the levels of performance here, because again, you don't necessarily have to have ray tracing enabled if you don't want to, but it does show you just how flexible this system can be. I mean, I may not be a great player, clearly I'm too high a level for this particular area, but yes, around about 60 FPS at 4K, not too shabby at all. But those of course were our single player games. How will multiplayer fare? Well, let's start off with some Call of Duty Warzone. I mean, we've currently got this set to the extreme preset as well, so no issues whatsoever when it comes to visual quality, and no issues with my gameplay. My skills. But you know what? That's Call of Duty Warzone. We're not interested in that. How about a real game, some Apex Legends? And this is now running completely natively at 4K resolution. This is just under max settings. It's just sunspot shadows, I think, that sets a very high rather than extreme. And we've currently got this running at around about 150 FPS, which is really not too shabby, as again, we're probably maxing out this screen refresh rate and we're not relying on any upscaling technologies or anything to get there. But obviously we will test this at 1440 in just a second. Oh, mama. I'm out of ammo. I'm out of ammo. This is a disaster. I'm coming, friend. Oh, yes. Boom, 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 boom. That's one. Yes, there we go. Boom, still got it. Oh, whoa, easy. That's embarrassing because I was actually trying to turn this down to 1440p and give you an audio test, but instead we'll do some wiping. Oh, come on, yes! And I haven't even got any audio, come on. Whilst they're healing up, here's our acoustic test. So really not too shabby whatsoever. And I now realise, as we're being shot again, still going, how about that? Our frame rate has now massively increased, because of course we are at 1440p, to around about 170, 180, nearer the 200 FPS mark, obviously depending on when and where you are in the title. So yes, very, very flexible system, going to be perfect for all manners of games, but obviously if you do want to play like 4K without DLSS, ray tracing, you are going to have to step it up to something else, but likewise if you're mainly just playing multiplayer 1080p and you don't care, then you could step down to something a fair bit cheaper. But I'd love to hear your thoughts on this. What do you make of our system? What do you make of this case? Personally speaking, I think it looks absolutely incredible. I love how clean it is, and I love the fact that everything can be synced together so easily. But if I was doing this myself, I'd probably go for a higher end system in this particular chassis, or look for a more affordable case. But either way, obviously, as I said, maybe look at getting some different fans that are easier to cable manage and give you less mess. But I hope you've enjoyed this video. Smash the like button if you have, get yourself subscribed, and as always, if you do want to check out current pricing on anything featured, then you can find it listed down below with our affiliate links. But thank you so much for watching. We'll catch you in the next one.